welcome to Taking Stock number 87. Last week I spoke about what I considered to be one of the more obvious sliding door moments in my life. One of those changed in directions, clear and obvious that even at the time something which initially felt really awful also felt as if somehow one's life had been set back on the correct set of rails. And that led me to think about a genre of fiction which many people enjoy, and about one book in particular. The type of fiction I'm talking about is known as alternative history. Books which ask the question, what would have happened if? And then tell the story as if that indeed had actually happened. By far the most popular area of alternative history centres around the question of what would have happened if Germany had won the Second World War, closely followed by if the South had won the American Civil War. And there are many novels written with these as the basic premise, as well as at least one recent TV series and several movies. There's an absolutely fabulous epistolary novel called A Prophet Without Honour, for example, about a man who in this timeline assassinates Adolf Hitler before he activates any of the horrors of the Second World War or the Holocaust, or the Endlösung, the final solution that we know about in our history. I recommend it heartily, and not because I know the author or even because of the genre, but in a funny sort of way despite the genre. It's a really good book in its own right. But other historic moments are also the subject of novels by quite serious authors. Len Deighton wrote SSGB about the occupation of Great Britain after a failed D-Day set of D-Day landings was countered by a German invasion back in the 1980s. And even Kingsley Amis in the 1960s wrote his novel The Alteration, based on the idea that Henry VIII stayed married to Catherine of Aragon and thus the English break with Rome never happened. So even he's had a go at alternate history, as has the comedian Ben Elton. Another which sticks in the mind is called The Guns of the South by Harry Turtledove, which combines alternative history with science fiction this time, and suggests that what might have happened if time travel became possible and some nasty white supremacists managed to transport 100,000 modern AK-47 assault rifles and millions of rounds of ammunition back in time to the Confederate States of America at the height of the American Civil War, just after the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. But all of these, it seems to me, are just variations on an idea which I'm sure many, if not all of us, have sometimes yearned to be able to do, and which I found most memorably explored in a book by an author called Ken Grimwood. The book was called Replay. In that novel, the author explores the idea of someone being able, literally, to start again. Rather like William Golding's Pincher Martin, the main character dies on page 1 of the novel, but wakes up not in heaven or hell or even purgatory, but in his own bed in his college dorm at the age of 18. Everything just as it was then, all the events of history in his life just as they were, but he with the knowledge of what was to come, personally and nationally, and therefore perhaps with the ability to change things, at least for himself. That's a powerful thought, isn't it? The idea that we could somehow go back in time to a particular moment and start again, knowing what we know now. After all, we all have regrets, for we all make mistakes. Haven't you ever yearned to be able to correct something disastrous? Wouldn't it be great if we could just somehow undo those bad decisions with the full knowledge of what we've either avoided or initiated? The A&R executive at Decca Records, who rejected the Beatles because guitar groups had had their day, probably never forgave himself when they went to Parlophone and made hit after hit, and million after million for their record company. The Arsenal youth team manager who released my fellow Chingfordian Harry Kane from their academy at the age of 8 is probably still kicking himself. Something which, as a Spurs fan who went to the same school as Harry Kane, gives me particular joy. The college contemporary who helped his two friends start up a small tech company in one of their parents' garages, but who had second thoughts and recouped his $300. Probably now wishes he'd kept his 30% investment in what is now known as Apple computers, don't you think? Is there a moment perhaps to which you wish you could return and do or say something different? That moment when you wish you could take back something you said or change something you did? Or some would say that you wouldn't be human if you didn't. Edith Piaf may well have sung to great acclaim, "Non, je ne regrette rien," but it seems to me that anybody who truly regretted absolutely nothing about any aspect of their lives has lived only half a life, or at the very least, gone through life with a level of arrogance and self-centeredness which has rendered them oblivious to the misery they must thereby have inflicted on those around them. I don't believe that there is any rational human being who truly believes that they haven't in some way, large or small, made an error or made a choice which in hindsight they would change. I know I have. And I'm pretty certain that anyone given time to contemplate the many and various mistakes, wrong choices and wrong turnings we all make would all wish they'd done better. You only need to look at how many times on social media that in one form or another we are asked, given the chance, what would you tell your 18-year-old self from the perspective of your current age? Most of the answers that question elicits are quite radical, challenging, and even dramatic. Go to drama school, write that novel, have the courage to ask that girl out, emigrate to Australia, climb a mountain, backpack around South America. All varying degrees of live the dream. And of course, from the perspective of an unfulfilled 50-year-old, I only choose that age because it's a partial alliteration which pleases the poet in me, as does the sentence I just used to explain it. Anyway, moving on. From the perspective of an unfulfilled 50-year-old who sees the sand running out of the hourglass and their own choices narrowing as they get closer to approaching the funnel's neck, that all makes sense. You, after all, know what happened when, say, at the age of 13 you tried to protect a so-called friend from a gang of embryonic psychopaths and got attacked in his stead. And maybe you would like to tell your 13-year-old self that nobility has its cost. The thing is, we do not live our lives backwards way round like Benjamin Button. The person who wants to spur into action or counsel caution to their 13, 16, 18 or for that matter 40-year-old self is only the person he or she is precisely because of those choices, precisely because the sum of their experiences leads them to where they are. To divert your 18-year-old self is to destroy your 40-year-old self and thus negate the meeting. It's a well-known paradox in the science fiction circles which explore this proposition. It's interesting that when God speaks to Moses from the burning bush, stay with me here, it's relevant. When Moses asks who he is speaking to, God answers not with a name, but with a statement. I am who I am. Now, there are lots of cultural and superstitious reasons why God, according to the narrative, wouldn't give Moses a name, but instead gave him a description. But of more interest to me is that when God replies to Moses, the words he uses, which we most often translate as I am who I am, could also be taken to mean in Hebrew, I was who I was, or I will be who I will be. Later on in the Christian Testament, Jesus specifically refers to Moses in the burning bush when he says in Matthew 22:32, did he not say to Moses, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Now, I believe that God is a being for whom every moment is now and present. Every creature who has ever lived, who is living, who will live, is present and living in that moment by the will of the ever-present Creator. That's why I believe we must not be shackled by our past, nor expend emotional energy grieving over that we cannot change. Yes, we may have regret over, or rejoice in even, our memories of who we were and what we did. There is no doubt there may be amends we need to make and relationships we need to have repaired. But if we are to grow, truly grow, and find fulfilment in each stage of that growth, and even in our decline, then it's only in accepting the scars which have shaped us that we may look to the glory which is yet to come. Stay safe, people.